there is a lot of anger, which I completely understand, about the defacing repeatedly of Sir Winston Churchill's statue and people trying to set light to flags at the cenotaph. Now, I found that offensive on both counts, and I couldn't understand why the police were not getting more involved to protect those two particular monuments, given their importance to so many people in this country. Why did the police let that happen?
Well, for the avoidance of doubt, I condemn unequivocally the criminal damage on Churchill's statue and on the cenotaph and the attempt to burn the flag. Look, it's not for me to be an armchair police officer. The police have a very difficult job. The police make a decision, and they have a split-second decision to do so. The police are looking into...
They were targets, those two monuments, and it just seems to me that actually it's not helpful. You know, I completely support the police in the way that they've come under attack by some of these protesters. It's completely wrong, should never be allowed to happen. But I find it hard to understand why the police have allowed the protesters to repeatedly deface Churchill's statue or do what they did at the cenotaph. They should be protected.
And the police will protect them today and going forward. I mean, the police
why didn't they before? I don't understand.
Because the police make split-second decisions, and I think it's unfair for me as the mayor to criticise the police.
That's not a split-second decision, is it? That's one that they knew may happen. They know it may happen at any protest down in that area. And I just think there should have been a ring of steel around some of those monuments to protect them, because the imagery, unfortunately, what I don't think the protesters who did this realise is it does so much damage to their cause, a cause that I and you completely support, which is the ongoing battle for racial injustice and to correct that and to correct inequality, which we know exists. But when the imagery that comes out is Churchill's statue defaced or the cenotaph being set alight, that will just enrage many people in this country. It won't bring them on the same journey.
Well, I accept everything you've said except the criticism of the police. What we'll do going forward from today is to protect the cenotaph and the statue of Winston Churchill and other statues.
Who makes that call? Is it you, then?
No, the police on the ground, they're commandos who decide operationally what happens. And they literally are, I mean, I don't want to, make it sound simpler than it is, but these are split-second decisions. There are separately officers watching.
It's not, though. You keep saying that. Look, let's be honest. It's not a split-second decision. They knew there was a high chance that those monuments would be targeted. So what I'm just curious is, who decides what gets protected? Is it you, as the mayor of the city? Do you have a word with Cressida Dick and say you've got to protect the Churchill statue and the cenotaph? Is it Cressida Dick that makes that decision on her own? In other words, you say it's going to happen now, but we've already had days of these things happening. Who made that decision not to protect them?
So policing matters are operational decisions, and politicians don't interfere with expert police officers on the ground who make operational decisions.
So Cressida Dick is to blame?
No, I don't think she's to blame. I think there are officers in a fast-moving event who've got to be looking at a number of things in relation to protesters around Whitehall, protesters in Parliament Square, protesters on Vauxhall Bridge going towards the US Embassy, new protesters arriving. The vast majority of them are peaceful, lawful and safe. A small minority who are targeting statues or the cenotaph or the flags or throwing missiles at our police. A separate decision about to bring in officers on the horses. They got a better view, a sightlines view. Separately, there are cameras watching what's going on, giving advice on the earphones. Officers are working. There's a chopper overhead.
Listen, you don't have to talk. Look, it's obvious. There were a few flashpoints. I think it's been exaggerated what was going on. I know people who were in those protests. They said largely peaceful. I think there were a few idiots causing trouble. I don't think most people disagree with that. The police probably wouldn't disagree with that. I found some of the imagery, that policewoman hitting a traffic light, being badly hurt and people laughing and cheering. I found that disgusting. None of that helps the Black Lives Matter protest movement in any way at all. So I completely support the police when they come under fire like that. And I think we have one of the finest police forces in the world, actually, when it comes to controlling that kind of thing. But, and it is an important but, when we're talking about imagery and we're talking about what happened in Bristol with Edward Colston's statue, which I think, I don't know why it was still up there. It's just very inflammatory to have a slave owner presiding over people. But we've got to protect, I think, some of those symbols of what this country is about.
Well, I wanted to ask you...
is certainly one.
Of course. But I wanted to ask you, Sadiq Khan, that in the case of Edward Colston, there's no doubt, really, in most people's minds about who he was. He may have given his money to the city for good, but how he got his money was evil. It was slave trading. And of course, you know, at that time, there was an acceptance of it until slavery was abolished. But it's disgusting symbol of history, the number of slaves that he traded from that harbour where his statue was eventually dumped. But there are other characters, aren't there, and individuals who are more complicated, you know, which we have seen from the daubing of the word racist on the statue of Sir Winston Churchill. So by what measure do we decide which statues remain and which, you know, we need to start thinking about changing?
One of the things I want to do is in London to look at how the public realm in London works in 2020. And I've announced, you'll be aware, a commission to look into diversity in the public realm in London, bringing together historians, experts in art, council leaders, community leaders and others to look at public spaces. You'll be aware in 2018, as a result of a brilliant campaign from Caroline Criado Perez, we had our first ever statue of a woman in Parliament Square, 11 great people of history, great blokes, no woman. And so we've got to look at our public spaces. You're right, there are some clear-cut examples of people where it's inappropriate to memorialise them, commemorate them as icons. They're slavers, they're plantation owners. Others, there's a complicated history, and that's why we should have the discussion and conversation about whether our public spaces, not just statues, but street names, murals, properly reflect the society we live in 2020.
I just want to talk to you about something slightly different, because it's also significant for social distancing measures, is that, as Piers mentioned earlier, the lead story on the Mail Online this morning is about a Swiss tourist who has landed in Heathrow as soon as quarantine was introduced. He says he's ill, he needs to get on the tube, he's completely unaware that we are in quarantine. Now, one of the government ministers, the Care Minister, Helen Whately, was asked on a different channel this morning how many people have been quarantined under the new rules. She couldn't give an answer. And this tourist didn't even seem to know there was a quarantine. Now, London has a number of airports. Do you know how many people came in yesterday? And do you know how people were being informed about the fact that unless they were in an exempt group, they needed to go into quarantine for 14 days?
No, the Prime Minister stopped engaging with us. I've not been to Cobra for weeks and not heard from the Prime Minister for a week. So I've been saying back in March that I'm concerns because we've got 4 airports serving our city. We've got Eurostar coming in. I was told yesterday from press reports that people were using public transport who'd come in on aeroplanes and were supposed to be being quarantined. In Hong Kong, by comparison, everybody who arrives on a plane is given a test. They're made to wait in the airport until the test results come back. If they can't come back straight away, they're given a hotel for the night. And so it makes a mockery of the government's move to...
Why wasn't that introduced, for instance, your jurisdiction is London? Why wasn't that introduced at the 4 London airports? I mean, we have people now coming in who may be symptomatic, may be infectious. You know that the result, you know, there were no new deaths in London the past 24 hours. It actually seems to have got a grip on the coronavirus problem for now. If we've got people coming in symptomatic, that would be an issue, wouldn't it?
Well, actually, there have been deaths recently, but they've not been reported yet. So we shouldn't assume there've been no deaths. But you're right. I mean, I've got no jurisdiction over the airports or Eurostar, but I've been since early March talking to the government about this. They late in the day announced this 14-day quarantine measures, but it seems to be a mockery in relation to those arriving not being given the test, so they could be asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic.
Well, it makes no sense at all. I mean, just finally, you say you've got no dialogue with the Prime Minister or Number 10 at all.
You haven't been to Cobra for weeks?
No.
Well, the mayor of the biggest city in the country, the capital city, 12 million people, and you have no contact with the Prime Minister?
Where the protests
in a pandemic.
are taking place?
It's not with that one trying. We've been regularly saying to the government, surely I should be involved in the conversations. It's not vanity. I'm the mayor of the biggest city in the country.